15-year-old Alex Rodda headed out after school to go and meet one of his friends. But when he never returned home later that evening, his mum Lisa knew something was wrong. She called all of his friends that she knew to ask if they knew where he was. But they said no, they hadn't seen him, but they knew he was with a boy called Matthew. They weren't sure where those two had gotten to. But Matthew was not a boy, he was an 18-year-old adult, and the nature of their relationship was not a truthful friendship. Instead, it was full of lies, blackmail, and ultimately, murder. This is Red Rum, stories about the true victims of crime. I use News Archive documentary footage and books to research these cases, and so the episodes are accurate to the source materials I can find. You can find all episodes as a YouTube or podcast version in the description box down below. Lisa and Adam Rodda were living in the small village of Pickmere in Knutsford in the early 2000s, and when I say small, I mean tiny. The last census said there was a population of just over 500 people there. Lisa and Adam soon had a son who they called Alex, and in 2019 he was just 15 years old and so was living with his mum, and he would commute into his high school at Holmes Chapel High School every single day. At this high school, he was incredibly well liked. He was popular, he got on with pretty much everyone. His Instagram is still active and it has 21 photos of him on his own, posing for photos, but also with a number of different friends of his.
Hey guys, so I'm back with another video. So this is a daily life in Alex Rodda. Just chilling. See you later guys, that's the end of my video.
There's a kind of confidence that really exudes from Alex's Instagram profile, but what really struck me most when looking through his Instagram is that he really gives off the impression of being young. Alex was reported over and over again to be incredibly popular. People liked him, they found him funny and engaging. And I think a part of that, at least, has to be how himself he is. The photos on his Instagram show him smiling and playfully responding to his friends' comments, each message full of love. But they also show that Alex is young. He's 15 and he seems to be a sort of young 15. I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but it's clear that he is a bit naive to the real world. I think that's probably normal for a 15-year-old. It certainly was for me when I was 15 and probably a lot older too. Alex seems naive and sometimes some of the decisions that he makes aren't the smartest, but remember throughout this that he is just 15. He's a kid. I'm not excusing all of his behaviours, but I think that added context is really important for this case. It was in October of 2019 that Alex was on Facebook and he came across the profile of someone that he knew. It was not someone he knew well, but someone who had gone to his school and was a couple of years older than him. So by this point, this person whose profile he was looking at they'd left that high school, they'd gone to college, and this person's name was Matthew Mason. He was studying agricultural engineering, and by this point he was 18 years old. Looking at that Facebook profile, Alex decided to click on sending a friend request to Matthew, and Matthew accepted. The pair started talking, and at first their messages were quite casual, but soon they began to grow a little bit more intimate in their nature. And the pair started talking, and at first it was very casual, just messages that were sort of chitter-chatter. How are you? What have you been up to today? Alex already knew quite a bit about Matthew in terms of that he lived on a farm, that he lived with his family near Knutsford, just a 15-minute drive away from where Alex lived. But as the pair continued communicating, the content of their messages began to sort of progress, becoming even more personal and eventually became quite intimate. In one conversation on Facebook Messenger, Alex complimented Matthew, calling him fit. And soon after that, Matthew sent Alex his Snapchat username so that they could exchange messages on there. Something that is obvious, but I feel I do have to mention, is that Matthew's 18 and Alex is 15 years old at this point. Matthew's an adult, Alex is a teenage boy. The content of the messages sent between the two of them is not actually fully public knowledge. I imagine partially this is because a lot of their communication was on Snapchat, and there's the possibility that these messages would disappear after a certain amount of time. But either way, we know that Matthew was communicating with Alex in an inappropriate and eventually in an illegal way. So we know Matthew is 18 years old. He's of legal drinking age here in the UK, something that Alex wouldn't be able to do for another 3 years. So one night, Matthew went to his local pub and he had a fair few drinks. So many so that he was actually quite drunk by the time he left and made his way home to the farm that he lived on. When he returned home, he sent Alex a picture of his penis. This is obviously illegal. Matthew had sent a sexual image to a child. He then later sent Alex a video of him masturbating. Although Alex couldn't legally consent to anything sexual that was happening between him and Matthew, it does seem that by all accounts, Alex was pretty excited about this new relationship, which is what he saw it as. He told a number of friends that he was seeing someone, and his friends reportedly spoke about how happy Alex had appeared. His confidence had shot up, and one of his friends described that he was appearing to, quote, glow. Matthew even turned up at Alex's house one evening. He drove there, and he sat outside in his car just waiting. Alex messaged him, however, and told him that he couldn't see him because his dad was in and he just wouldn't let him out. This solidifies that this boy is very much still a child. His parents are still dictating when he can and can't go out. They are his carers and they've put these boundaries in place. Boundaries that he does have to stick to. Very normal for a teenager of his age. Alex didn't mind though. Him and Matthew were still speaking regularly, and in his eyes, things were moving in the right direction. There was a problem though. One day, after having been speaking for a little while, Alex decided that he wanted to move things off of private social media like Facebook Messenger and Snapchat and have a look at what Matthew liked to show of his personal life online. He followed Matthew on Instagram, and that's when he found photos of his girlfriend Caitlin Lancashire. The two had been dating for 2 years and it was very clearly a serious relationship. No doubt Alex was probably devastated. Matthew had never mentioned Caitlin, and not only had he been leading Alex on, he'd been actively pursuing some kind of relationship with him. Although what that relationship was exactly just wasn't clear anymore. It was November the 3rd when Alex sat down and decided to write a message out to Caitlin. He had no qualms about exposing what Matthew had been doing. He was the one in the wrong, essentially dating 2 people. And so Alex typed out, quote, "Are you going out with Matt Mason?" And he hit send. Moments later, a message popped up on his phone from Caitlin. She had typed back, yes. And that is when Alex kind of lets rip. I mean, fair play to the boy. He's just found out the person that he's been building some kind of relationship with has been lying to him, but he's also been lying to his girlfriend of 2 years. It's ballsy, but I really do think it's fair enough. Alex wrote, quote, "Because I thought I should let you know that the past 2-3 weeks, Matt has been trying to message me. He came to my house in his car to meet me last week, but I told him my dad wouldn't let me out, so I didn't meet him. I have told him it has to stop, but just thought I'd let you know before he does a dickhead move, and I didn't know he was dating you until I went to go follow him on Instagram." And Alex was not done there. He was clearly very upset and angry with Matthew. And so he messaged Matthew too, telling him he knew he had a girlfriend and he had told her exactly what had been going on. Matthew responded to this angrily, asking why on earth he'd messaged Caitlin. Alex replied saying he'd done that because he knew it was wrong. Quote, "You have a girlfriend who loves you. There's no need to speak to me." The conversation then continues with Alex eventually writing, quote, "Look, your GF loves you. She doesn't know what to think because she and you were together for 2 years. Like, what the fuck? If you were that serious, you should not have got your dick out at the end of the day. You need to tell your GF the truth, Matt, because I already have." Alex continued, this time reminding us what he'd sent. He had the intimate photo Matthew had sent to him. He also had the video of him masturbating. Alex said he had proof, and so there's no point in lying, but Matthew clearly doesn't want to accept this, and so he continues on denying it. I'm not really sure why. He knows he sent these things to Alex, but maybe he's in denial about what he's done, hoping that if he denies it enough, then, I don't know, maybe Alex will somehow let this go away. But he obviously doesn't know Alex very well if he thinks that's going to work. Alex then messaged Matthew saying, quote, "I will literally put your dick on my story and at you if you don't stop lying." With that, it's probably crystal clear that Alex is being serious. And so Matthew then replies, quote, "I'm talking to her, Alex, please don't." That same day, just a few hours later, bank records show that Matthew set Alex up as a payee on his bank account. Seconds later, Matthew transferred £50 to Alex's bank account. I mentioned earlier that Alex is just 15 and comes across as naive at times, and this is one of those times. It's clear that Alex does not recognise the seriousness of the situation, especially in what he later goes on to say to his friends. He really doesn't get the kind of danger that these actions could put him in. Matthew then spoke to Alex about how he was trying to be honest with Caitlin, but it didn't matter. Soon after Alex had told Caitlin about what had been going on, Caitlin ended the relationship with Matthew. Now, the next bit is a tad fuzzy in terms of dates and exact details of what actually went on, but I actually don't think that's too important. The basic facts are that over the next 2 weeks, Matthew continued paying money into Alex's bank account. Over those 2 weeks, a grand total of £1,270 went from Matthew's into Alex's bank account. But it seems as though these payments weren't just about keeping Alex quiet. Instead, they were linked to various sexual activities. On the 9th of November, the pair met and Alex performed a sexual act on Matthew. I've said it before, but I will say it again. This man is 18 years old and Alex is 15. And let's be serious, Alex knew what he was doing was wrong. There were a number of conversations between him and different friends where Alex would tell them exactly what was going on and how he was getting all of this money. In their words, Alex knew this was wrong, but he still did it. One friend said to Alex, quote, "You really need to stop. It's not fair. If he doesn't pay you, what will you do?" And Alex replied that he'd tell the feds and get him on the sex offenders register. But this friend then replies saying that surely if he does that, Matthew will just go to the police and say that Alex was blackmailing him, and then Alex will get into trouble. Quote, "It's a criminal offence. When are you going to stop? Seriously." Matthew goes on to pay Alex a lot more money. Now, I haven't said this yet, but Alex does come from money. It's reported that he lived on this big farm. His dad is reported as being a millionaire. And so on one of the days that they're messaging, Matthew says to Alex that he's skint and that he can't afford to pay him anymore. But there's a little bit more conversation. And then Alex transfers him, that same day, he transfers him £700. This man is 18 years old. I don't know, I would not have £700 lying around I don't have £700 lying around now, but certainly not when I was 18. So he does have access to large amounts of money whenever he wants, really. A little less than a month later, on the 7th of December, Alex and Matthew decided to meet up again. This time, Alex invited Matthew round to his house where he lived with his mum, Lisa. He knew Lisa was going to be out for that period of time and so knew it would be safe to have him round and for them to engage in sexual activity. The pair were having sex when Lisa returned home. This was later confirmed by text messages that said that Lisa had interrupted them. It wasn't long before Alex and Matthew came down the stairs and they passed Lisa. And Lisa would later describe looking into Matthew's eyes and feeling fearful. Quote, "When I looked into that boy's eyes, I have never ever in my life felt fear. My whole body felt fear." It was later that same day that Matthew transferred Alex £100, which the prosecution believed was a payment for the sex that they had had earlier in the day. A few of Alex's friends had tried to discourage him from both the blackmailing and also from selling sex. But Alex seems to kind of shrug both of these things off. At first, he's sort of joking and making light of this as if it's really not a big deal, and then he continues to do this through a number of other messages with different friends. Matthew, however, was not shrugging it off. In fact, he turned towards thinking about what he could do to resolve what he saw at this point as a problem. Alex, at this point, was demanding more and more money, and Matthew wasn't able to pay. He was borrowing from family and friends, but he decided that he just couldn't continue this. And so he needed to come up with a plan. But his plan wasn't just about stopping the payments going to Alex, it was also about something else. We know from what was later said that Matthew was concerned about the fact that Alex was a boy. There's clearly some internalized and externalized homophobia going on here for Matthew. He's a man who is very clearly also gay or bi. He doesn't want to admit this to anyone, and the fact that this might get out is scary for him. The other reason Matthew was scared about this getting out was because of how young Alex was. Matthew knew how wrong it was, and yet he repeatedly and continuously continued on with this relationship, if you can call it that. And so Matthew had been Googling what would happen if you kicked someone down the stairs. And then his searches turned more specific and more sinister, including everyday poison and things that are poisonous. He then searched for missing people in Cheshire and the mysteries of Cheshire's unsolved missing people. Clearly at this point he's looking for an out, and he just wants to make Alex disappear. He doesn't care how that happens. On Thursday the 12th of December 2019, Alex and Matthew were speaking on Snapchat as they usually would. And Matthew sent a message asking Alex if he wanted to meet up. They arranged to hang out, and Alex is last seen leaving his home at 5:24 p.m. He then made a phone call to his friend, quote, "How weird is this? This guy that I'm meeting wants to take me to a special place, a secret place in a forest." Alex even admits it's a little odd, and he's seemingly confused when he's on this phone call to his friend. But ultimately he says he's going to go anyway because he needed the money. Matthew picked Alex up, and once he was inside the car, Alex got his phone out, went on Snapchat, and he posted a story to his Snapchat and to his Instagram story. That photo is of the inside of Matthew's car, and he placed a small love heart emoji in the bottom corner. Alex's friends would be able to see that photo on his Snapchat over the following few hours and into the next day. What they didn't know right away was that would be the last photo that Alex would ever post on his Snapchat. In fact, it was the last photo he'd ever take on his phone and the last message he'd ever send. We don't know exactly what happened next because we actually only have Matthew's version of events, and shockingly, it's not a believable version. But what we do have are some of the facts. So here's what we know. Matthew drove to this area of woodland in Ashley, which is near Altrincham in Greater Manchester, and it's about a sort of 15-20 minute drive from Pickmere, where Alex is from, where he lives. And so they ended up arriving there a little bit before 6 p.m. Matthew somehow managed to get Alex out of his car. Now in some reports it says that he was dragged, and in other reports it said he was willing to go. But based on that earlier phone call he had with his friends, Alex was maybe a little bit confused about why Matthew was taking him to this forest, but he clearly hadn't seemed scared or felt as though he shouldn't be going. So, however it happened, Matthew managed to get Alex into the woods. We know that soon after that, Matthew pulled out an iron wrench and he used it to strike Alex on the head 15 times. After that, he then dragged Alex's body back through a section of the woods, with the aim probably that he wanted to put Alex in his car and then transport him elsewhere to dump his body. But Matthew wasn't able to get Alex into his car, and so he just left him at the side of the road, still alive, still breathing, but very much on the brink of death. Matthew got a cigarette out, he lit that cigarette, and he actually smoked it whilst Alex was lying there, bloodied and barely breathing. Then Matthew got into his car and drove off, believing that no one had seen him and wouldn't be able to place him where Alex's body would eventually be found. As he was driving away, he saw Alex's phone that was still on the passenger seat, and so he got rid of that. We don't know where he disposed of that or exactly how he disposed of it, but we know that he did not want anyone to find what was on that phone, and so he trashed it somewhere, somehow. And then after that, he headed to a pub in Pickmere, just metres away from where Alex's mum Lisa was beginning to grow worried as her son had not returned home. Whilst Matthew was at the pub, One of his friends spotted some specks of blood on his jeans, but he fobbed it off as saying that, oh yeah, he noticed that earlier, it was just from a nosebleed that he had, it was nothing to worry about. Lisa was becoming more and more worried as the minutes turned to hours and the night got later and later. Eventually, she did try calling Alex, but his phone wouldn't connect. After that, she called round all of his friends that she could think of, but none of them had seen Alex that night. And in fact, no one had heard from him since he left his house at around 5:30. Meanwhile, Matthew continued on to another pub, this time sending his friend a Snapchat. And then after that, he headed home and then sent Caitlin a Snapchat. Then, at just after midnight, he got a message on his phone. Quote, Matthew, could you please contact Cheshire Police with regards to your friend Alex? Thank you. Alex's friends, of course, knew about his relationship with Matthew. They knew that he'd been planning on seeing him that very night, and so they let Lisa know that. She tried to make contact but had no luck, and so soon after that, she called the police to report her son as missing. Matthew hadn't answered any calls or messages relating to Alex, but what he didn't know was that he'd already been linked to Alex in a pretty damning way. A passerby, a local who lived nearby to the entrance of the woods, had just so happened to be walking by whilst Matthew and Alex were in the woods. He didn't see either of them, but what he did see was a parked car. He suspected drug dealing was going on in that area, and so he took a photo just in case he needed it for later. And it's a good thing he did, because ultimately this would lead to a very quick arrest. The following morning, the bins were due to be collected from the areas that surrounded that area of woodland. Some workers were collecting bins nearby when one of them came across Alex's body. It was 7:40 a.m. in mid-December, so it is freezing cold outside, and the bin workers could tell that the body belonged to a young boy, a teenager, and he was not in a good way. So emergency services were called and they arrived on the scene. One of the bin workers performed CPR for 10 minutes whilst they were waiting for emergency services, and this bin worker noticed how Alex had a wound at the base of his neck and it looked pretty bad. Emergency services arrived within 10 minutes, but once they got there and examined Alex, they realised he had no pulse, and unfortunately he had already passed away. He was pronounced dead at 8:12 a.m. that morning. Soon after Alex's body was found, police received this tip-off about that car being parked outside of the woods. They managed to track down the car owner because the photo obviously had the license plate in it. Of course, the owner was Matthew, and given where Alex's body had been found and the fact that his friends thought that he'd been with Matthew on the night of his murder, Matthew was tracked down and arrested. It was around midday on the 13th of December that Matthew had been stopped by police whilst driving his car. He was arrested on suspicion of murder and he was brought into police custody. Police immediately noticed that there was dry blood on his hands. This man hadn't even washed Alex's blood off of his hands before going into the station. Inside his car boot, they also found a bag and it was filled with things that were incriminating. Alex's coat was in there and the bloodied wrench was in there, which of course was later determined to be the murder weapon. At trial, Matthew decided to say that he had gone into the woods with Alex, but they had both gone in willingly. They had their own free will and they decided to go in there together. He said he only took that iron wrench to scare Alex. But, and get this, he says that the reason he used the wrench in the end was because Alex had attacked Matthew. Alex, the boy who has no reason to attack, he's getting money from this man. He was joking with his friends earlier about it, and he literally had no reason to attack Matthew. And yet, Matthew tries to use this as his defence. And when Matthew was presented with this premeditation aspect, the fact that he literally Googled things about how he could kill someone, and Matthew said that he was only ever doing that because he was scared or that he was suicidal. The Google searches, he said, were because he was suicidal. But Googling what happens when you kick someone down the stairs isn't exactly that, is it? Thankfully, though, the jury did not believe Matthew, and he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 28 years before he can be considered for parole. He did appeal this sentence, and it was reduced down to 26 years before parole consideration. Alex's family spoke about him after the trial, and they spoke about how he was a wonderful, gentle, loving, kind, caring boy. He lived his life to the full, and that his precious life was cut short all too soon at the hands of Matthew Mason. Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Red Rum. This week I have a recommendation that's a little bit different. It probably will only really interest people who are in the UK and probably in the Northeast, so it's pretty specific, but it's a pretty cool thing that's happening, so I wanted to talk about it. There is a theatre production of a film called Saint Maud. Saint Maud is a brilliant British horror thriller kind of thing. It's a film by a director called Rose Glass. It was her debut feature, and it's just brilliant. It's about this woman, Maud, who goes into look after this woman who's at the end of her life. She just needs care until she eventually will die from an illness that she has. And while she's there, she becomes convinced that she has to save this woman from her sins. And she is convinced that God is talking to her. And it's kind of a brilliant look at maybe unresolved trauma and psychosis and many other things. It's brilliantly made. Really, really recommend that film. You could definitely watch the film, even if you're not in the UK. The UK thing is that there is a theatre production happening at Live Theatre in Newcastle at the end of October, I think, like end of October. I'll get the dates. I'll put all the details in the description box below in case you're interested in that fairly niche reference. But if you can catch the film, I definitely would recommend it. I'd love to hear what you think, as always. And other than that, I'll see you next week for another episode of Red Rum. Bye.